At the beginning of the film, we observe a middle-aged writer looking pensively at the snowfall through his office window. His boss calls Will and agrees to give him a settlement with an additional premium and strict non-disclosure. The writer is satisfied with all the demands and then leaves the publishing house. Will takes his belongings, which include the developments for his new novel entitled Daddy's Dream House. Colleagues drink champagne and wish the writer success in future endeavors. On his way out, Will runs into an old acquaintance who gives him her card. The woman says that such a talented writer shouldn't spend his life working behind an editor's desk. Will takes the business card with a smile, then goes to the railway station. In the vestibule, a fellow traveler decides to talk to the writer, but the writer silently leaves as he is burdened by communication with unfamiliar and uninteresting people. Will gets off the train and runs into another acquaintance. Lisa decides to drive the writer home because in such a snowfall, he is unlikely to be able to call a taxi at a reasonable price. When Will arrives home, he plays a little joke on his wife by throwing snowballs at her. Upon learning that the writer has resigned as editor, Libby can't contain her genuine joy. His wife says she is proud of the decision Will has made. Libby tells that the children are already asleep, whereupon the writer brings her into the house. Will notices the daughters under the sheet, but continues to pretend with his wife that he doesn't notice them at all. The writer plays a prank on Trish and Dee Dee, after which he sends the girls to the bathroom. Will also points out that his wife continues to make improvements to their new home. At dinner, Libby thanks the writer for the flowers she found on the doorstep. Will is perplexed as he hasn't given or sent anything to his wife. Libby changes the subject and says that now she's very calm because the writer will work from home and they will be able to spend more time together. After fooling around before bed, the couple are finally alone together. The next day, Will goes out into the garden and pays attention to the neighbors. Anne hands over her daughter to her ex-spouse, with whom they quarrel even after the divorce. Jack looks disapprovingly at the writer, and the neighbor keeps looking back and closing both doors. At home, Libby is painting the walls while her daughters are making music. Will, on the other hand, decides to finally get to work on his book, but his wife soon calls out to him. Libby notices the children's height marks in the doorway and says she doesn't want to paint over them. Will agrees, as the history of the previous tenants gives the house a special charm. David, meanwhile, is trying to get all the paperwork done to get custody of his minor daughter. Evening comes. Libby decides to visit the writer in his study to bring tea and see how the work is progressing. The wife notices a frightened Dee Dee hiding under the desk. The daughter says she wants to go home because she is scared. Trish tells her that her sister saw some man in the window, although she didn't see him herself. An alarmed Will decides to check the yard, but soon realizes that Dee Dee is probably scared of her reflection. Morning comes. The writer decides to fix the shutters and notices someone else's footprints under the window, exactly where Dee Dee claimed a man was standing. Back home, Will says nothing to his wife and compliments her on her appearance. At night, the writer hears a strange noise and goes down into the basement. There, Will discovers a whole bunch of goths who are performing a strange ritual. The writer catches one of the girls, and she tells him that they come to this house because of the tragedy that happened there. One of the guys gives out the cryptic phrase, "He's back," after which they all get in their cars and drive away. The next day, Will questions the police officers. The writer learns that in his house, a certain Peter Ward cruelly massacred his wife and children. The further fate of the criminal is unknown to the police. Upon returning home, Will talks to his neighbor. However, he learns nothing. The writer tells Libby about what happened at their house. During the night, the couple again notice a dark figure outside the window, but it manages to escape. Morning comes. Libby is in a panic because she can't find her children anywhere. Looking into the basement, Will's wife sees that the girls are not there. The writer goes into Trish and Dee Dee's room, after which he hears voices. Will discovers a secret room in the wardrobe full of toys, where his daughters are also sitting. Examining the items, the writer discovers that they belong to Beatrice and Catherine. In the afternoon, Will decides to watch the videotapes that the Goths left in the basement. The writer learns all the details of the crime committed by Peter, who was then transferred to an asylum for the mentally ill. Later, Anne comes for a visit and brings a roast. When Will calls out for the family to all come downstairs, the neighbor suddenly declares that she has to go. Likewise, Anne doesn't answer a question about the previous owners. Libby is renovating and notices marks on the walls from Peter and his misadventures. The next day, Will decides to go to an asylum. Unnoticed, the writer learns that Peter is being held in Ward 308, whereupon he goes there. On the bedside table, Will notices a photo of his family, which makes him terribly angry. The writer demands that the returning Peter answer how he got the photo. However, it turns out that Will is actually facing another patient named Martin. He tells him that Peter has been gone from the asylum for a long time. Will returns home and doesn't want to tell the terrible news to his wife. Suddenly, bright headlights flash outside the window. Will goes out into the street, after which an unknown person almost runs him down. The writer is furious because he is sure that before him is the same Peter, who in the past massacred his family. Will tries to catch the criminal, but he manages to escape. The writer stops the patrol car and shouts to explain that Peter is stalking his family and threatening them. Anne observes this scene through the door. However, the police officers don't react to Will's words seriously and suggest that he sleep. The next day, the writer goes to the police and the hospital on his own. There, Will learns that the perpetrator has a large scar on the back of his head. According to the investigation, Peter's wife managed to snatch the gun from him and wound him in the head. Archived video from the asylum shows that the perpetrator was very keen to get out to find who had actually massacred his family. The officer reveals that Peter didn't want to use his old name, and so he made up a new one. After this, the policeman finally shows Will the criminal's face, which looks like he's looking in a mirror. The officer tells the writer that he was released and not convicted for lack of evidence, and then shows the writer his hospital room from which Peter formed the new name, Will. The writer tries to accept the truth, but says that his family is waiting for him at home. The officer replies that Will destroyed his family 5 years ago. The writer doesn't believe it and calls Libby, but the officer refuses to talk to her. Walking through the wards, Will is surprised to notice his colleagues and acquaintances who are actually patients of the asylum. The writer goes home and tries to make sense of what has happened. Will suddenly notices that his house is in fact badly warped, and on the facade here and there are eerie messages to the man who took his family's lives. The writer realizes that the only way into the house is through the basement. Once inside, Will sees only cluttered and dusty rooms, without the comfort and his family. The cruel truth comes over the writer, and he sits on the floor to take away the pain of realizing the horror. Sitting in the kitchen, Will suddenly begins to see his family again. Libby touches the writer and tells him he has a high fever. After sending the kids to bed, his wife sits down close to Will and suggests to talk. The writer confesses that he is in fact the same Peter. Libby doesn't believe it and replies that Will just has a fever and is hallucinating. The writer then talks to Trish, and she says that her real name is Beatrice, like Peter's daughter. Dee Dee's name is actually a nickname, and her name is Catherine. Libby, on the other hand, is short for Elizabeth, which was Peter's wife's name. Will is sure that everything he learned at the hospital is the truth. The girls don't deny it, but Libby just puts her husband to bed and insists that he is sick. During the night, Will wakes up and goes to the children's room. Trish complains of a sore throat, and the writer sees a bullet wound on her. Libby discovers the same one on Dee Dee, only not on her neck, but on her back. The wife panics when both girls lose consciousness and screams at Will, as he does nothing to help them. The writer tries to calm Libby down and tells her that their daughters have been dead for 5 years. Suddenly, Will hears a knock on the door and goes downstairs. The writer learns that his house is uninhabitable, and so the decision was made to board up the building to avoid accidents with teenagers and children who love abandoned buildings. Will, tries to shout to his wife when he suddenly notices a neighbor. In the morning, the writer goes to Anne and learns that it is her daughter who left flowers on the doorstep in memory of the tragedy of 5 years ago. For a while, Will stays at the neighbor's house. After all, they used to be friends. Because of this, the ex-husband takes away Anne's daughter. Because there's a mentally unhealthy person in the house, the neighbor suggests Will to go to a psychiatrist who used to treat him. The doctor also seems quite familiar to the writer. The psychiatrist says that Will's mind protects itself from the truth with the help of such fantasies. Back in the house at night, the writer interrogates Libby's ghost. His wife says that someone was climbing the stairs that night, and then she and the children fell, feeling great pain. Anne enters the house and tries to convince the writer to leave the fantasy behind. Unexpectedly, Will sees that very evening. While he was in the garden, an unknown man climbed the stairs and pointed a gun at Libby and his daughters. Hearing the words about the gun on the phone, Will burst into the house and attacked the perpetrator. Libby tried to help, but accidentally hit the writer. In the house, in reality, Jack shows up at the house and says that he actually ordered Anne to get his daughter, but the criminal accidentally mistook the house. Jack throws the couple into the basement and decides to burn the house. However, Will manages to save himself and Anne. The writer then returns to the burning building for Libby. The ghost says goodbye to Will, for his time has not yet come. After a while, the writer wanders down the street and sees his book, Dream House, on the showcase. This is the end of the film. Thank you all for watching this video to the end. Give this video a like. Write in the comments what you think about this film, and see you in new videos.